I'm not the one who would present here like a super visionary idea how education should be. I'm, as you can imagine, I'm already a little bit careful with that because I feel it's one of the problems we have today. I think one of the reasons why we have so many teachers ending up in burnouts is that you have two separate worlds, the reality of the school and then what happens when you open a newspaper, other people thinking about what school should do.
A teacher traditionally is that person that actually shares the content and is in school, right? I would argue that, as you pointed out, the skills that are the school is perfect for is the collaboration, the meta skills, the social skills, because that's where you are in a group. I'm very convinced that a flipped classroom environment, so you learn watching videos, you know, reading, all the indirect ways to communicate, and then having the teacher more like a mentor to help with the learning.
You need super good teachers, super well trained, who are able to work in teams. Like that is, for instance, one aspect. If you want to make sure that a school is successful in a difficult environment, you must be able to form a team of teachers that figure out all together, how can we improve this place? And then you have to give them resources to do that. It is damn hard to do these changes. It's damn hard. And it's not only that we need ideas. We have enough ideas, I guess. What we need is also people who can enact them, who have the resources and the trainings and the support to do it. And that is another part of it we have to get our head around. Yeah.
Basically, Mitchell Resnick says educational environments should have low floors so you can get in easy, high ceilings, you can professionalize a lot, and wide walls, meaning you can try out all kinds of different applications, themes inside the educational environment.
I guess like every politician would confirm that this is one of the biggest issues they're dealing with. How can we deal with the differences and how can we solve that problem? Because it is a huge problem for us. It's maybe one of the biggest problems we have in education, that we have this incredible diversity of performance and also perspectives young people have.
Welcome to another episode of the 42X Deep Dive. Today, I'm super happy to have one David Klett as our guest to discuss education, the possible benefits and risks of moving things online, of having been forced to move online. And David comes to us as an old friend and acquaintance. We know each other for almost a decade, I believe, and have always been having these conversations about the possibilities of the digital and learning in particular. So this is kind of the first time we're taking this to a broader audience. And David, thanks so much for taking the time.
So thank you very much for having me, actually.
So today the session is going to be a little bit different from our normal setups. We're going to, of course, ask David about what he thinks is good, bad, and particularly dangerous about 42, and get some insights in that direction. But we also want to have a very concrete exchange, a bit more than an interview, a conversation, whether or not there is an opportunity in the forced changes that the pandemic brings about. And so that is going to occupy the middle part of our conversation. But before we do that, let me give you a little bit of a background about David. David studied business administration and philosophy at the famous, some would say infamous, private and alternative University Witten Herdecke, with joint acquaintance, friends, and collaborator Dirk Becker. He later wrote his PhD in the domain of sociology of childhood. And while at Witten Herdecke, he founded the consultancy Noeto, where he worked between 1999 and 2008. Noeto, I hope I didn't butcher the pronunciation, is from the Cheyenne language and means let's go, let's do this. It's also used as a battle cry. I quite like the vibe of that. He stopped in spending some time in New York for Scholastic in 2008. And then after those steps, he dove deeper into the Klett universe. Klett, of course, being one of the leading German educational publishing houses. And he has always an interest in all things digital. Since 2020, he's a member of the Klett executive board of the Ernst Klett AG. And that's one of the largest European, not just in Germany, but a European educational company owned 100% by the Klett family. So there's of course much more to say about David and his life and his thinking. Many of those aspects will hopefully come and show through in our conversation. But David, are there any other aspects you'd like to share with our listeners in terms of self-introduction?
Yeah, I mean, that was already, there was this moment when you said, oh, German publishing house. And I felt like, actually, there are a few more things I could say about Klett. I don't know if your listeners are already acquainted with Klett. Klett is quite known in Germany. I guess there are a lot of students like me who were growing up with our textbooks, but Klett is much more today. So today, 8,500 people working for us in 17 different countries. And it's not only publishing, we also operate our own kindergartens, around 150, around 30 schools in Germany and Switzerland and Brazil, and also universities of applied sciences and distance learning institutions. So it's a rather broad kind of a group of companies, around 90 companies, but all dedicated to education. So that is actually the common denominator. We only do education and nothing else.
Thanks, that's certainly really helpful. And I was aware that there is a Klett universe, but getting the concrete numbers and locations is really helpful. So we always ask our guests to come up with the first question, sort of to give them the topics and the flow of what they are currently thinking about and what matters to them. So you chose the questions in times of a pandemic, of school closings and homeschooling. Was there something especially surprising for you? And did you learn something you were not aware of before?
Yes, that's a good question, actually. Thank you for asking that one. You know, it's I brought up that question because it goes through my mind for a longer time already, for a few months now, because in the beginning, I was discussing with my colleagues a lot about computers and what kind of computers should be used at home and what kind of software should be used and what kind of platforms, and all this is super interesting. And we learned a lot about that. But at the end, what we realized is how important is the place, the school, as a place of learning, as a place where students with their bodies and their minds, their brains and their souls are gathering together. How important is that place? That is something we realized, that this place is super important. It is super important, and we weren't aware of that before. And why is that? First of all, from a publisher's perspective, we realized that all our products are designed for having a place we can rely on, where teachers and students meet. And so we had to recheck again, how can we adapt with our products so that they can be used in a situation where you don't even know what will happen next week if students and teachers come together. That's one aspect. The other aspect is, and I think that's much more important, is we realize that the learning environment children have at home, the learning environments are very different. So privileged children from households where they have their own room, where they have a good internet connection, where they have a good computer, and where they have parents that can help them, that have the time and the knowledge to help them. Things are working smoothly. But where you don't have those circumstances, these are terrible times right now. And what we realized is that we have to accept that the school as a place of learning is where these differences of social backgrounds are not totally, but to a certain extent, leveled out. And this effect of the school of leveling out these differences cannot be seen anymore when you have all the children sitting at home. And so I'm not saying that all the other questions are not important, like, for instance, how can the computer help in the future to make learning more interesting and inspiring and so on. But on the other hand, I just realized when this pandemic is over, we should revisit the school and say, how can we make sure that this place where children come together from different social backgrounds, how can we develop this place to make equality and equity better possible? How can we support and sustain that? Because that is what it's built for, actually, at the end. Does it make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I heard two very strong arguments. One for having a reliable place and institution to count on that is also built on the hundreds of years at least of experience with schools. And the second one that the social differences are have an increased impact for homeschooling. Now, let me answer then with my analysis of why the homeschooling actually leads to a very positive outcome and a shift. And then we can put these two next to each other and see where there is actually strong disagreement, or maybe they complement each other. So my observation would be that we're basically forced into digitization. Things that were said to be impossible and take years and years, all of a sudden had to happen in months. And that means that we're now confronted with a new reality in learning. That is that ideally, in my view, next to the school, there is a digital component of learning that is made, that becomes an important part of everybody's learning. And I think there are some aspects here that are particularly important. One minor one I want to preset is that when you are in home, usually, of course, not for everybody, but for most people, they feel psychologically safe at home. And that might not be the case in a school where there's all kinds of bullying and hierarchies and social situations happening as well. So arguably for some maybe more introvert, more less social learners, being at home, having the quiet, less stress, will get them into a good state of learning. But I think there is a much more fundamental observation when it comes to homeschooling. And that is that the kids get access to the internet, and to make this very vivid, they get access to Google and to Wikipedia, right? With Wikipedia, you obviously have an encyclopedia that the original encyclopedia was the beacon, or at least a very strong beacon for enlightenment, for the understanding that there is not God or other higher authorities that make knowledge and pass that down to us as a divine gift, but that we are actually in charge of defining what things are, how they are interpreted. And Wikipedia, of course, is the perfect example of that enlightened understanding. So giving all students access to Wikipedia and arguably more difficult to use tools like Google is giving them access to the biggest knowledge base humanity has ever created, and that can by nature only be a good thing. I'm not saying that it doesn't, it needs to come with instructions. You need to develop the respective skills and literacies to fully benefit from it, but as an observation, it's a boon to our societies. It's a boon to the individual learner to have access to all that knowledge. Secondly, I would argue that this kind of access, and in particular Google actually, allows you to pursue all interests in the universe. My son is totally into Pokemon, and he finds an enormous community there for each little aspect. And that understanding that there's almost a bottomless possibility to engage in a topic really fosters this self-understanding, this identity creation, this pursuing an interest with your to the point where you become an expert, where this defines you as a personality. My one of my two doctor fathers, Professor Faltin, always described entrepreneurs as truffle picks, looking for the next nuggets and the good opportunity to pursue. And I think that's the kind of mental state, the mindset, when you use Google, when you browse for information, when you research a location for your next vacation even. That's an entrepreneurial mindset that I would argue is very positive for the learner and for us as a whole. So taking this together, I see positive effects on self-reflection, on determination and how passion develops, on ownership and entrepreneurship that students, learners see their lives as a learning journey, going from one step to another, growing over time.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was your take on this was very interesting for me. And it is, I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit I make this now a little bit boring when I say, I think you're right and you're somehow wrong, and I make it boring because what I'm demanding in a sense is to look with a little bit more differentiation on our educational system. It's a little bit boring because normally we would say this is school and school should be like that. And we need a vision for that. And then everything will be better. And then I come around and said, what kind of school do you mean actually? Are we talking about primary school? Are we talking about secondary school, higher or lower secondary? And what kind of student do you have in mind? And so let me elaborate a little more in that direction. So first of all, in Germany, for instance, we have 8.5 million students in general education, not talking about vocational education. And these are of course not the same. So for instance, having primary school students in Germany, kids from 6 to 10 or 11 go to primary school, giving them having them sitting at home and giving them access to Google doesn't help much. It doesn't matter if it's a great home or if it's not such a good home, because at the end, these kids, their job is, apart from many other things, to learn reading and writing and the first steps in math, and especially to learn about social interaction. It's the first time that they are for a longer time going away from their parents, from their homes, and they do stuff that parents can't control anymore. That is what primary school is about. It's the first experience to really leave your home behind and be in a totally different environment where a teacher is telling you what to do, or it's the first point of reference. You gain trust with this new individual, and you realize this person will give me something. It's not my parents' job to give me. So what I want to say is that the social experience for primary school students to go to a school is ultra important, apart from learning basic skills you need to engage with the world, reading, writing, and math. So primary school is already, for me, a totally different animal than secondary school. When it comes to secondary school, here I would bring in another distinction. When I listen to your ideas, I would say, yes, I think you have a student in mind that is perfectly built for this kind of new homeschooling environment, and that's yourself. I would guess that you, as a person already, when you were in secondary school, you were super independent. I guess you had a good background regarding knowledge, and I guess you had a lot of books at home. I don't know exactly, but that is you can correct me in a moment. And I guess what you brought into school was an open mind that is able to acquire knowledge, that was interested in finding its own ways along the way in the school, and I'm pretty sure that there are hundreds and thousands of children like that can benefit a lot from more freedom they have now being at home. What I want to say is that not every child is like that. Not every child is able to deal with this kind of freedom the situation right now is giving them. These children, many children need teachers as a person they can trust, and teachers that can help them to find their way and to build up resilience, to build up ways to self-organize, to self-control, to finding their interest. Like, I think that is something I always want to emphasize, that teachers are so important in the development of young people who cannot manage themselves so well. And therefore, I think exactly these kind of children, for them, all these wonderful things like enjoying psychological safety, having access to Wikipedia and Google, having the chance to find intrinsically what is interesting for them. Maybe some of them will just get lost in the situation. So I think I would bring in here also a distinction, what kind of student can really benefit from the situation and what kind of students might even end up worse in the situation. So that would be like my first take on that.
David, fair point. You know, I think we're all created equal, and you know we start out in the same way, and we should have the same access to opportunity. But the way that this plays out over time is very different and creates very different results and outcomes. And obviously, the benefits and challenges are important to consider from the learner's perspective. I think that's you know, one important view, that you don't just say you know, this makes it easier for schools or for teachers, or makes it more difficult or easier for teachers. That's one perspective, but I think you're putting the right one, the stress on the difference in learning. And here, I guess my reply would be, yes, you know, some students benefit all the way how I described, and for others it's not as obvious. They still have an opportunity because we're all, before Google, we're all equal, right? And there is many different ways to finding your passion, and to, you know, whether, I would argue it doesn't matter as much that you go through a whole full-fledged education with you know, ending up in a higher degree, but that you find for yourself what matters to you, and that what you're passionate about. And ideally, you probably know that Venn diagram where you say, I'm passionate about it, there is demand for it, and I can make money with it, right? If you put these three things together, basically you have a profession. And I think the passion part is more and more important, while the making money part almost comes with the quality and the depth of understanding that the learner has around that particular theme. Where I want to go is that I think that the way that different learners from different social situations benefit from that access is different, but the opportunity is there for everyone. And then to get the learners where it's less likely that they end up in this positive, good conditions that you asked, and you know, rightly said, not everybody has that. How can we improve that through means of public access, through means of having educational materials on YouTube, you know, where it's an easy entry point, they're already there, they want to learn about something. Like, just that mindset of asking Google or YouTube how to do X will empower a lot of people to get to, oh, I didn't know it, but now I can actually learn almost on demand what I want to do, fix a bike, you know, take care of a garden, whatever skill it is. So that will enable a growth mindset. That's a term Carolyn Drake from Stanford established, where she says, especially in low social status contexts, people think that they're not talented, that they are where their parents are, and they don't believe in that social mobility and that they have all that potential. So by seeing that they can learn, I would argue it improves not necessarily the hard conditions, but the soft conditions for them to have a fulfilling life.
I mean, it would be now a little bit too fast for me to go exactly to that point or to discuss now this point, because there is something else I want to, if you're allowed to challenge you a little bit about. And that is, the point I want to make is that having access to knowledge is not learning. Having access to knowledge is not education. And learning to fix a bike by watching YouTube videos is not education, in my understanding. And it is especially not what's happening in school, especially not what's happening in lower secondary, primary and lower secondary. What I want to say is that an individual that is able to benefit from this wonderful access to knowledge, an individual that can learn even a language by watching YouTube videos, finding his or her own resources, finding partners in the world to communicate with them. The ability to do that needs a lot of preparation. Schools should give them. So what I want to say is that we should talk a little bit more what has to happen in school that it creates individuals that are able to benefit from all these possibilities. Because giving access to the world of knowledge is not enough. That is why, for instance, I would say, hey, giving Google to students is nice, but I would expect a school to teach students to collaborate, to create things together, and to experience how hard it is that you are 4 or 5 people, with some are lazy and some are the super front runners and some people are interested by something else, and what it means to create something together and to fulfill a task and to perform and at the end to pass a grade. And like all these kind of school must be an environment where you learn these things. And then along the way, you might realize having Google here will help me to solve that problem. And so over time, you develop the ability to self-study. But the ability to self-study and to enhance yourself, like to perform a growth mindset, it needs a lot of preconditions. And we should talk about what should school do so that you have that. And that is a complex task. And then you will need teachers again. And then you will need also a social environment again. And you should define it. What kind of social environment is good for that? So for me, the access to the knowledge of the world in YouTube is something that comes very late in the process, very late in the process. And I want to add one more thing. We at Klett, we are the leading provider of distance learning in Germany for adults. But it's only a little fraction of adult learners who are able to self-study, even if they are guided, supported by our professionals who are doing it for a long time. So we have a lot of experience in helping adults to self-study. And so I want to say that at the end, I would guess it's only a rather small proportion of people that are equipped by their education, by their homes, of course, where they grow up, and by their schools, so that they're able to do all these things and to benefit from them.
So thanks, David. To heat up the conversation a little bit, I would argue that you could also see that thousands, millions, probably billions of people are self-studying every day on the web and use YouTube for more practical things like fixing a bike, but also on philosophy, meta skills, and that possibly what we're seeing with the low use of the self-studying materials that Klett provides, maybe they're a little bit too old school, right? And people have a problem because they're not as engaging, entertaining as some of the more self-organized, self-driven aspects that the studying in the World Wide Web would deliver. Let me point to a very concrete example that counters your point, and that is the 1 laptop per child narrative and an experience. And you might have seen the hole in the wall in India, where basically for the one laptop per child, they've dropped just the laptops in rural villages in Africa and watched how the kids use the laptops to learn and what the benefits of that are. Similar experiment or case was that somebody made a computer accessible in a wall in a slum in India, and the kids just went there and found out all these things and learned quite a bit. Now, these are the concrete examples. I think that in theory, again, a little bit in that vision department that you mentioned earlier, there was a great novel by Neil Stevenson called Diamond Age. If you haven't read it, and for our listeners, I highly recommend it. Basically, the story is a super high-tech, privileged engineer drops a learning book that he developed for his daughter in a slum, and a girl, no background whatsoever, has this highly sophisticated artificial intelligence that is designed to help her grow and ask questions and get educated. I think that while of course we're at the beginning of AI-assisted learning, I see great potential of something like what used to be Clippy or the Assistant or Alexa being on everybody's side and really not being a shopping list, what these assistants are mainly today, but really a personal assistant and somebody, an entity that helps you with learning and get moving forward. Lastly, let me challenge your use of the term teacher, or ask you if we are far from each other or if we're fairly close. A teacher traditionally is that person that actually shares the content and is in school, right? I would argue that, as you pointed out, the skills that the school is perfect for is the collaboration, the meta skills, the social skills, because that's where you are in a group. I'm very convinced that a flipped classroom environment, so you learn watching videos, reading, all the indirect ways to communicate, and then having the teacher more like a mentor to help with the learning. As we had exchanged before, the guy who fills the knowledge into the students, but someone who's igniting the flame of learning and of interest and enlightenment and curiosity.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there were a lot of points here, right? And I mean, somehow it's tickling me that regarding your idea that maybe our distance learning courses are a little bit old-fashioned and that we are like living in our own bubble, not really knowing what's going on with the adults today. But, I will leave it like that. And maybe we can revisit that another day. Then you were mentioning, that was interesting, you were mentioning projects like one laptop per child and a hole in a wall. And I barely forgot those because these are very old examples, it would be interesting to revisit them and ask, like, what happened to these? I guess there would be some surprises there. I can remember that Khan Academy was presented as the disruptor of education. And where is it? Where is it? Yeah, so I can bring a lot of examples where I say some people somehow believe to know the future of education, and we're presenting cases as the disrupting forces in our world. And I think it would be interesting to revisit those and ask again, like, what happened to these and why they developed the way they developed. And by that, I don't want to say that these are super inspiring and interesting projects. Yeah, you ask about the teacher. I mean, again, I think there are students in this world and schools in this world. I think about failing schools in Berlin. We could learn a lot by opening the newspaper. If you think about these schools, you don't start with flipped classroom. You don't start with new pedagogy where the teacher is a mentor that's helping students along the way to develop themselves. These schools are fighting to keep somehow order in the chaos. They try to give their students a minimum of skills so that they can find a way into the workplace. So I want to say that we have a lot of schools in Germany where the teachers would tell you it's very hard to get things going and to give the students at least a little bit that opens them a world where they can make their own money and find a job. I mean, we have in Germany still around 15% dropouts along the way, students would have no degree at the end. I mean, what kind of perspective many of those have? So I just want to distinguish here a little bit, like what we call in Germany, gymnasium in South Germany is a totally different ballpark than what we call Hauptschule, where, I mean, they try to dissolve these schools now, but like just to say these are differences we should be aware of. Okay, but let's go to an environment where more privileged and well-equipped children in a more homogeneous environment come together. Of course, teachers become here already much more trainers, supporters, mentors, who help the students to organize themselves. I think that a lot happened already in school. Like, I guess this idea that teachers are seeing their job in transferring just knowledge into the brains of students is not on the rise. It's going away more and more. So I think teaching in Germany becomes a much more diverse and a complex thing that you cannot just like pinpoint to this one kind of picture of knowledge transfer. And on the other hand, there are a lot of things to criticize. I'm not saying that everything's perfect. I'm just want to make you aware that actually you might have an ideal of a perfect relationship you should have with your teacher, and I want to remind you that in other environments I have to develop products for, this cannot be applicable. That is actually my point at the end, which we had already in the beginning. So I'm sorry that I'm repeating myself a little bit.
It makes sense that we come back to our principles. You know, as expected, I think that there is a number of points where we're actually not so far away, but there's also some fundamental differences that I do think exist, and we should tease out a little bit more. Not forever and a half. I'd say we do 1-2 more exchanges, but I do want to challenge your point that we accept the widespread in I would say learning conditions for students as the condition to deal with. I think, frankly, it is part of the self-perpetuation of the system to the way we treat the lower the learners with a more difficult learning contexts and less privileges, right? I think the way that Mitch Resnick puts it in his book, Lifelong Kindergarten, where he tries to promote a pedagogical approach that is very close and dear to what we do at 42. He talks about passion, play, projects, and peers as the 4 ingredients for good learning, for learning that is fun, right? And I think if we start with that premise, how do we make learning fun? How do we make, steer that curiosity that people want to learn? We can start with things like building a bicycle, after school chess club, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter what. As we agreed before, it's about learning to learn and having that interest to learn. And that, I think, exists in everybody, frankly. And so to find the right way to, allow students to do a project on FIFA on PlayStation and then understand something through that is totally okay. And that's where the conservative parts of the school system, of our established school system, I think are basically blocking the positive developments that could be triggered by a more advanced and more egalitarian approach to education, giving everybody the same access. Basically, Mitchell Resnick says educational environments should have low floors so you can get in easy, high ceilings, you can professionalize a lot, and wide walls, meaning you can try out all kinds of different applications, themes inside the educational environment. And that is totally independent of such arcane concepts like Hauptschule and Gymnasium, where we're really perpetuating social class.
I mean, first of all, I'm not a fan of these differences, of course, and I'm not thinking that we should perpetuate them in any sense. And you didn't mean that, of course. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't try everything we can to do these changes. I guess like every politician would confirm that this is one of the biggest issues they're dealing with. How can we deal with the differences and how can we solve that problem? Because it is a huge problem for us. It's maybe one of the biggest problems we have in education, that we have this incredible diversity of performance and also perspectives young people have. What I want to say is that it's damn difficult to change. And I have to admit that if Mitchell Resnick has like, when he speaks in metaphors like this, I would say, okay, I don't know how close you came to the reality of school. I don't know so much about him, but I just want to say that, yes, we should try these things. And you would find in Germany a lot of schools that try to deal with tackle this problem. One of the winners of the German School Prize in Dortmund, called Kleine Kielstraße, is a school in the toughest environment you can find in the city of Dortmund, with really, really, really difficult, with students with difficult backgrounds. And they have fantastic performance in this school. So teachers from all over, administrators, politicians, travel to Dortmund to visit that school to learn from them. And when you try to figure out what they're doing, I guess you would find some of the features you were mentioning, but also you need super good teachers, super well-trained, who are able to work in teams. Like that is, for instance, one aspect. If you want to make sure that a school is successful in a difficult environment, you must be able to form a team of teachers that figure out all together, how can we improve this place? And then you have to give them resources to do that, what is also often a problem. So I want to confirm that we should explore in that direction. I just want to tell you that in my experience, it is damn hard to do these changes. It's damn hard. And it's not only that we need ideas. We have enough ideas, I guess. What we need is also people who can enact them, who have the resources and the trainings and the support to do it. And that is another part of it we have to get our head around. Yeah.
Again, I agree that these are incredible challenges, and you know, they're not solved by intellectual exchange. They're solved by people who dedicate their lives, their professional careers to doing that, to being there for the kids. And you know, in a Rawlsian way, it's probably quite unjust how these teachers, mentors are paid and respected for that. I think, you know, now that I have kids in school, and now that I'm dealing with my kids in homeschooling, I can only say what I've heard many times from many parents, you know, deep respect for how these teachers manage a whole classroom full of you know, young learners who are obviously above all kids and have other things in mind, and trying to discipline, to create a sense of discipline and order in this chaos is incredibly difficult. If it's okay for you, I would suggest we see if we can find some common ground or not, and then move on to some questions that see if there is some aspects that are interesting and we can learn from in the 42 model. And I'd love to close out by hearing about some reading and recommendations you have for me and our community. So in terms of common ground, I would say that I don't think that we have disagreement that having access to the World Wide Web adds a new and rich knowledge environment to the established landscape, and that per se is a good thing. It doesn't come, you know, as a silver bullet, and it's not solving like that computer in a wall is not the solution to education. What we need to do is to figure out how to actually make good use of it, and embrace the creative and critical literacy that is needed to take advantage of these digital tools. And I'm certainly very happy to acknowledge that schools have an essential role in education, and especially in creating the social competences and interaction plays in general.
I don't think that we have, like, I think we have common ground. I think there is not so much, I think I see most of the things you're saying the same way. It's just what I'm missing, not only with you, like with a lot of conversations, when I have conversations about education, what I'm missing is a language of differentiation. People like to talk about the school, about the teachers, about the students, about what we should do. And I say, hey, that is correct, but can we dive 2 levels deeper and discuss what does it mean for primary school? Because primary school is fundamentally something different. I would always strongly argue for that a 6-year-old entering a school is something else than a 14-year-old. Yeah, that is, different tasks have to be tackled here than there. And then we have to talk about social background, and we should talk about numbers. We should talk about numbers. We should talk about, okay, what is the percentage of students we feel are fit to benefit from these things, and how many students we feel are not fit, and how can we shift it? So what I want is like a little bit more, you know, like a conversation that is like generally when we have these debates, and everybody has an opinion about education because everybody had an opinion, has an education. So if you have a dinner party, like, people can be super engaged in education. It's unbelievable how strong opinions are about education. In this moment, I always wish, let's find a language that differentiates a little bit more. And let's put our knowledge about school together and differentiate regarding social backgrounds, regarding how schools are equipped, also different systems. Finland is very different than Portugal, very different than Bulgaria. Like, I'm not saying that we all have to study now education. I'm just saying, like, a little bit more, and then maybe we can find better ideas and more clear solutions. That is what I'm lobbying for. Like, I don't want to impose on you my endless knowledge about this because I don't have it. I'm just saying that it would be interesting to dive with you a little bit deeper, and then maybe we come to a other plateau of discussion. Does it make sense?
Absolutely, and you have an standing invitation to continue that conversation over the next decades, and maybe we have some interesting experiments to implement along the way, and we learn together. I certainly am optimistic that the conditions for learning are going to become better and better, and that the technology we have will allow for more differentiated and personalized, you know, for exactly that customization and that richness or increased options for learning. And let's see, you know, where we can make a difference and where we can improve. Maybe that's a good segue to moving over to your perspective on where the educational field is going, right? You've already kind of set expectations that you will not paint, you know, visionary utopia for education, but I'm sure you must see points where you see trends already, and if you extrapolate them, they're good trends, bad trends. I'd love to first get a bit of a sense of where optimistically viewed you think we are going in an undefined time. Like, let's not talk about the next 2 years, because that's very difficult, and people will call you up in 2 years and say, what did you say there? Let's take,
promise that.
like, 20 years, 50 years, whatever you want to set as a horizon to say, okay, you know, we're not so much grounded in what's happening today. There is enough time and space to develop.
I mean, first of all, and you mentioned this already, I'm not the one who would present here like a super visionary idea how education should be. as you can imagine, I'm already a little bit careful with that because I feel it's one of the problems we have today. I think one of the reasons why we have so many teachers ending up in burnouts is that you have two separate worlds, the reality of the school and then what happens when you open a newspaper, other people thinking about what school should do. As a teacher, you must feel like being in an impossible situation because the whole world is overburdening you with things you should do. You should be able to do. You should be able to be. But you're a very normal person. Teachers are very normal people who try to find their own ways and to live their own lives and to have, they had a certain kind of education or are somehow prepped for school. And the most of them trying to do a very good job. And then you switch on the TV and you see intellectuals telling you that you're teaching the wrong things in the wrong system with the wrong methodology. That must drive you crazy. So I'm a little bit more careful because I think I'm not doing much good coming around and saying, this is how school should be. I'm sorry that 90% of the people in school will fail anyway. They will not live up to my expectations. So that like, I want to like make the playing field here a little bit with that. Okay, what I think the biggest problem, and that is also no surprise for you, is school has to eliminate as far as possible social differences children bring into the school. This is an imperative. I feel it is unacceptable, and especially in Germany, we have this big problem that where you come from determines so much what you can be in the future. School has to break that, has to break with that, has to deal with that, has to change that. And we have to ask ourselves, how can we help schools to make that possible? So I think equality and the equality of access, of future, of career, of success, of happiness is like the biggest problem we have to deal with, or is the biggest goal we have. And I think one aspect, and I think that is a trend in school, is that people are asking more and more, what kind of things do we have to teach children that make them resilient? What are skills that help children to deal with a rather uncertain future? Psychological stability, the ability to control yourself, to understand yourself, to reflect on your own emotions, to what is called executive functions. I think that is such an important thing to teach students, because I feel we are on our way into a more troubled world, and things are not as stable and as reliable as they were in the past. Like, it's not so clear what kind of job profiles you should prepare yourself for. It's not so clear what the internet will do to us, in a good and in a bad sense, like how it changed democracies and so on. So this is an unsure world and becomes more and more unsure. So we should ask ourselves, what can we plant in the minds and hearts of children that they can deal with this more? How can we foster being what we say in German, having Neugier, which is a beautiful word, but because it means you are somehow longing for the new. So how can we implant Neugier, curiosity? How can we implant curiosity? Because it is a driving force, like to evolve and to deal with problems, and help children to find sense in things. Because we know that the more you see sense in things, the more you can work for them, and also, if necessary, feel to a breaking point challenged. Yeah, if you see why you do things, if you see the why, you can mobilize more energies and to fulfill your goals. So I think that is one thing that is in school now becoming more important, executive functions as part of it. And I think this will be in the future more and more important, because it will be less and less clear what kind of knowledge, like clear-cut knowledge, we should give the children, because it might be outdated in the future. I also want to say that I'm not totally against this. Like, I don't feel that you don't have to learn poems, or that you have to learn about German literature because you have Google. It's not that I'm saying, hey, you don't have to learn a language, you have a dictionary. Like, if I have to look something up, it's maybe too late. I mean, we need to have a lot of clear knowledge in our minds to make combinations, to to rebuild it, to transform it into something new. It's like,
yeah, very strong points. I'm not going to co-referat you on all your answers, but just to sum it up, I think the respect for the educational practitioners is a very well made point, and hopefully, they will rise as we're talking about a knowledge society, an information society. Obviously, these practitioners should be very well regarded. The social distances and improving social mobility as a second goal, and I think is excellent. And actually, we'll come back to your last point about the resilience, stability. We're starting to talk about Lebenskunst in the 42 context, and yes, we're back at that point: Neugier, curiosity, sense making, creating meaning, finding a purpose in life. I mean, the purpose point is already, no startup can raise funds these days if they don't have a world improving purpose statement. So I think all points are well made and substantive. Do you have any observations and maybe instigations that we should look into as we're moving towards this better future? Are there any projects you'd like to recommend, any initiatives, thinkers that we should be aware of?
Is this already related to your library, or is
no,
this
that's not the book question. This is how do we get to how do we implement the optimistic ideas, that the goals that you have put forward? This might be a short question.
I mean, there is one book from Finland, from Pasi Sahlberg, I think he's pronounced the right way, who is explaining what the difference in the Finnish school system is compared to other European systems. I know, like after the PISA shock 2000, everybody was surprised, what is Finland doing? And then a lot of people went to Finland and came back and explained, yeah, Finland is a totally different thing, so we don't have to compare ourselves with them. For me, Finland is still a super interesting country to learn from, especially because they are not going the Anglo-Saxon way to understand learning as a process of little baby steps of things you have to understand, and all this bubbles up to education. They still understand, I think, closer to the German idea of Bildung, that education is a complex process that cannot be broken down to little steps that are measurable, and you have to master like as if you could step up a staircase. And so I think Finland, always not to forget, we can learn from them, and I try to learn a lot if I can there. I think Canada is an interesting country to look at. We should spend time with to understand when it comes to digital learning. Denmark is super interesting for me. I learned a lot from Denmark. I try to understand a lot. Education works very differently there already. The students are much more self-organized, self-driven. The computer is more, in your sense, like used as a machine that enhances the capabilities of students to explore the world and so on. So I think these were, for instance, these are 3 countries to look at where I find inspiration. But also Singapore is interesting. 30 years ago, Singapore was, was invisible in education, and today Singapore has incredible performance. Yes, people will say it's such a tough system, students are like squeezed out, or the knowledge squeezed out of the students, we don't know what the future, but Singapore is very interested to improve itself. So what I realize is that the government there sees, we have a tough learning environment here, we expect a lot from our students, but they also ask themselves, how can we take the next step? How can we also bring more freedom into the learning environments and so on? So for me, because I am trying to learn around what's going on in the world, because we can learn so much from different countries. So these would be the 4 countries I would recommend to take a closer look as one answer. Yeah.
Super interesting. And on Singapore, I share what you said. They have a reputation for being a very strict and formal place, culture. And I heard recently that they're actually they're very scientific in a way, right? They look at their numbers and they say, oh, we're great in this, this, and this, but we're not good in creativity. And now they're actually really ramping up programs, bringing in design thinking and more liberal ways of teaching and learning. And, I got to say, that aspect, monitoring, analyzing and designing, improving the practices you have, very, very impressive indeed. I resist the PISA question now, but I do want to go back to a point that we skipped because you jumped so perfectly into our debating point with Corona, good or bad in terms of shifting educational practices, that I didn't get to ask you your perspective on the opportunities and risks you see in the 42 model. And of course, I'd be more than happy to also answer questions or engage in questions that you might have around the systems.
What I understood about what you're doing and what 42 is doing leads to my thinking that, of course, this is a way to train adults in the future. I think it sounds to me that you're some kind of that you are front runners here in a sense, because you're saying we don't need a certificate. If we can show, or if someone can show that he has a certain skill, he'll find a job. And especially when it comes to coding, this makes so much sense because in my understanding, the future employers of these people have their own ways to test. And it says so much more to solve a coding problem than to ask for a certificate. And actually, where we hire coders, because as we know, content will become software. So we, of course, transforming ourselves also into software companies. We hire a lot of coders and we do it the same way. And at the end, we realize that certificates are not so important. Important is what problems these people can solve. So therefore, it makes 100% sense, especially in the domain of coding, to go that way. And I think it's super interesting not to have professors and teachers, but to create a learning environment where peers help each other to advance. My question would be, what kind of personality is cut out for that kind of learning environment? And I would guess that it is a very specific personality that is not so hard to describe and maybe hard to find. Because maybe a lot of people think they are cut out for that kind of learning environment, but they will fail along the way, which is a hard experience to leave a beautiful place where you feel at home, but you realize you don't have the things it needs to advance. So I would be super curious to learn how you select people, because we don't want to have people to have that kind of experience. But apart from it, it makes so much sense. And if I was young and if I had a brain that is somehow prepared to learn coding, I of course would enroll, and I would even come to Wolfsburg if necessary to do that. But I'm too old now,
Awesome. And again, very good observation. The selection is key. We, of course, don't necessarily call it selection, but finding a fit for the learner, right? Because it's actually not us selecting people. That's also the way that this selection works, is that you do an algorithmic thinking test on the website, 0 instructions. You just go and you have to solve problems, basically. Very simple, no coding necessary, but logical thinking. It's kind of if that, then that kind of environment. You can try as often as you want, but you need to get to a certain stage, right? That's the first hurdle. And about half of the people that try get through that. So it's not super difficult. You need to be attractive, then you try. Half of the people get through that. Then if you pass the first stage, you're invited to participate in a 1-month boot camp where you go through the full experience. And it's actually, even more intense than the studies later will be. This is pretty much a 24/7, you go on the weekend and do an extra project. There is exams. It's a pretty stressful environment. And so I agree, this is not something in its current form that can replace the established system. I think it's an interesting, innovative way to complement it. And I think over time, over really generations, over years, we might see that more and more people are in fact capable of self-motivating themselves, of having that appetite to learn this way. But it's not in the end of the month. Basically, we have a lot of dropouts, people who already say it's not for me. And then we have a very clear algorithmic way of seeing, okay, how many projects, who are the best. And importantly, the second thing we look at, who got the best feedback on the social level, right? We ask people, who do you think, went beyond the call of duty in helping each other, right? Who is a good peer learner? And that's the social component. It's not a popularity contest. It's about who works in this peer learning environment. And with that, we get a pretty clear stack ranking. So we don't select the people, they kind of select themselves. And unfortunately, we only have a certain capacity. So we can't take everybody who wants to go, but we are also not fixed on we have to have 150. If there's 200 that are great, then we'll take 200. I hope that fits with what you expected. And again, more than happy, looking forward to reflect on the practices and what we are seeing over the years with you. Right now, we have the first 160 students in the boot camp, and they're coding and everything is working. And trust me, I say a big thank you every morning to the universe that the school is working the way it does right now.
Did you have to pass the test before they hired you, or?
I didn't have to, or actually, I don't know if they checked. I did do the hiring test, and it worked okay. I don't think I would have been a stellar student, but yes, my algorithmic thinking is somewhat developed. And now, together with the CEO of the second 42 school in Germany in Heilbronn, we are engaging in some of the learning projects and brushing up on our programming skills too. So we at least get a sense for where the students are and what the problems are and what's working, what's not.
Great. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So one last point you already brought up briefly is that we don't think that learning with practice is the only way to learn. I had great conversations with Maggie Johnson, who's the VP for Education and Research at Google, Wim Cerf, who obviously has a lot of experience on how people learned about the internet and on the World Wide Web, and many others. And what comes up quite a bit is, yes, practice-based learning is kind of the skill that you get paid for. But then there is the computer science that actually is about abstracting, analysis, modeling, being creative, understanding the meta part of the trade. And then there are the more personal, what you called executive functions earlier, right? What I'd already mentioned, Lebenskunst, the pace that you have in your life, what habits are making up a good life for you, understanding yourself and connecting with others, etc. And then the fourth bit is Bildung. I don't think that the English term education actually translates the German understanding of Bildung correctly, but you might have thoughts about that as well. I mean, for me, Bildung is like the goal of becoming wise, of creating a worldview that makes sense, of being able to put things in relation to each other. And as Schiller famously put, striving for the sublime character, right? That's a completely different goal than the quantified self or other more Anglo-Saxon utilitarian uses of knowledge and education. So we're trying to build a library that brings together knowledge artifacts, and they don't only have to be books, but we think most of them will be books, that our students should read to become happy software engineers. So not just, you know, good technically, but happy as people. And that means good employees and teammates, because happy people make good teammates. That's the preface. So we are looking for recommendations for books that you know, are not in the learn C++ in 21 days, the perfect book for that. More books that are relevant for years and years. Maybe you recommend as a book that is hundreds of years old already, or one that you think will be relevant for many years to come.
Okay, then. I mean, I knew up front that you would ask me that question. Of course, I was thinking about it. What I didn't know is that this library is to make your coders happy, because I guess the book I'll present right now won't make people happy, actually. It's more a book that put you into stress, because after passing the test to get into 42, you realize that a book can be a test too, and a test you can fail. What I brought to you, and this will not surprise you so much because this was such an important book for me in my past, and I thought other people should benefit from it. The same way is this book I will show you right now, and it is called Social Systems from Niklas Luhmann, which is available in English. So this is the English copy I brought here. Niklas Luhmann is a sociologist, German sociologist, died 1998, and 30 years before-ish, when he was invited to the chair in Bielefeld, said, as a professor, he said, I will create an overarching theory of society that would cover every aspect of communication in society. It will take 30 years and it will not cost anything. And that is how he started his project, and he ended it, and more or less ended it, and died. And along the way, he created one of the most intriguing, fascinating theories I came across in my academic life. And one of the cornerstone of this theory is that book, Social Systems of Niklas Luhmann. I also, because, and that is maybe a little bit more relevant than for your students, is this book I found from Niklas Luhmann. It's called Organisation und Entscheidung, which is now focusing more on the organization as a social system. And I guess all of your coders later will work in organizations, maybe believing that an organization is a rational construct. And then down the road, they will realize that's everything else than what we associate with rationality. And maybe especially for coders, this will be a surprise. So we can prepare them a little bit. The Klett Foundation, the foundation of my family, supported the translation of that book into English. I didn't have the copy, so my secretary printed out the cover for us. And you can see it here. And if you want those books for your library, of course, it will be my pleasure to send them to you.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's a wonderful present. Yes, I can already say that we want to take you up on that. Luhmann is a very prolific writer and thinker that I personally enjoy and have a love-hate relationship with. I think like most people I talked with about him. I think most importantly is is the idea of a systemic perspective. That seems to me something that doesn't come natural to step outside the systems that you're in and realize how they're intertwined and working. So, a little bit like Derrida, maybe with his deconstructivism, right? You learn how to take things apart and tease, put the spotlight at certain spaces. So I would think that your recommendations are spot on, because that's the kind of stuff that doesn't change, no matter whether there is an AI involved in organizing or not, the human aspects, the institutional aspects and the dynamics there to look for them are very relevant. So thank you very, very much for those tips. And that brings us to the end of our conversation. Is there anything you thought I would ask and I didn't? Any open aspects? You're welcome also to plug any stuff that you would like our listeners to take a look at, a website, a question, a project that seems worthy, or else I'm only here to thank you and hope that we can do this again soon.
I enjoyed this conversation a lot, I was thrilled when I saw your questions. I knew that you could deal with me contradicting here and there a little bit, or bringing in another kind of flavor. It was my absolute pleasure, and I think ending this conversation with a reference to Niklas Luhmann, I don't want to add more because I hope, of course, that other people would pick up the ball and play a little bit with it. I hope one day you will invite me to Wolfsburg. So I, of course, would like to visit 42, and all the time, always, I'd be thrilled to talk to you again.
Super.
Thank you very much.
Have a great afternoon. Bye.